All right, guys. So today I'm going to go over my blood work. So this is the most recent blood work from April 21st, which is roughly almost 2.5 years off testosterone, off anabolic steroids, off everything. So this is where things got really interesting. So this was a fun panel. This is a full-on comprehensive panel from Merrick Health. If you ever want to get blood work done, go to Merrick Health. Use my code PETE for 10% off. Now, we're going to dive right in here. TSH, so thyroid stimulating hormone, was 1.76. Guys, this is the lowest my TSH has ever been in my entire life. So on the last panel from December, it was 2.09, which was also the lowest it's ever been in my entire life. And you want your TSH to be lower because it means your thyroid is performing more optimally. Your thyroid's more efficient. There's more thyroid hormone being produced. Your thyroid's just functioning better. So my goal has always been to get this to 1.5, and we're getting closer. 1.76 is way lower than it used to be. It always used to hover around 3, upwards of 4.5 for years. Like, I always had this very mild hypothyroidism, and now it's just very efficient, which is pretty wild to see. You know, maybe some of that is due to that year I took iodine. So iodine gets converted to thyroid hormone. And for about a year, I took iodine at 7.5 milligrams, and 7.5 milligrams of potassium iodide. So 15 milligrams of that total. And I took it every day, this high dose iodine protocol. And maybe that kickstarted things with the thyroid gland, because I haven't taken that in probably at least 8 months. But that seemed to really get things headed in the right direction once I came off it. So very encouraging. T4 was up a little from last time. Nothing notable, 1.33. But thyroid is just doing so much better. And I'll get into, some reasons why I think this might be later on when we look at testosterone. I think there's some related factors as far as both of the improvement of both of them. Now, white blood cell count, 4.4. So on the last one, it was 8 because I was sick at that point in time. 4.4 is pretty standard. Red blood cells, hemoglobin, and hematocrit are significantly lower than last time, which is interesting. I do think, I've seen this pattern before. I've had previous labs where they were also all pretty low. And I do think there is some mild anemia going on here. Normally I would be against supplementing with iron because there are potential, cancer risks when iron is elevated. But as I'll get into more later on, iron being like a precursor to red blood cell production, I think it might actually have merit in my case because my iron levels are also pretty low, as we're going to see, and ferritin as well. So with all of those being so low, I actually think it would make sense to supplement potentially with low dose iron to see if that would help bump some of these numbers up a lot. Because hematocrit of 40, I would personally like to see that at 45 where it was last time. If I could kind of hold it there, that's a good in between where your blood's not so thick that you're in danger of clotting. Because as you get into the upper range of hematocrit, 50 plus, I'll often see guys on TRT in the 53, 55 range. That's when you get much greater risk of clotting. There's a much thicker blood. It's a lot more dangerous at that point. But this is just a little low for my liking because obviously red blood cells, hematocrit, hemoglobin, all that plays a role in oxygen. And so the more oxygen uptake I can have by having those higher, the better off I'm going to be as far as a performance standpoint. Now, let's go to neutrophils and lymphocytes being the two most notable white blood cells. So they make up the majority of the white blood cells in your body, neutrophils and lymphocytes. There is a 1.3 neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio, which is really good. Now, optimally, you'd want this to be like 1-to-1, but that's unusual, and you will see the ratio go way up when you're ill. So on the last one, 3.1, I was sick. It makes perfect sense. But traditionally, you would not want that ratio to be too far apart from a 1-to-1 because that's also going to show if there's inflammation going on. But that's kind of interesting. Now, eosinophils are not that high. They were 0.8 on the last one. They're 0.4 here. So they're still at the upper end of the reference range. But eosinophils go up when you have allergies. So I took an allergy pill, I think the day of this blood work, the morning of, and that probably brought it down a little bit. But eosinophils are a white blood cell, 100% related to to allergies. So nothing to worry about. That's kind of interesting. Let's go to the CMP, I should say. Glucose 80, fasted glucose 80. So obviously this was all done fasting. My last glucose was 85, this was 80, and you're gonna see some other things later on that I'll get into with that, but 80 is a really solid level. You don't wanna be too low. You don't want your glucose to be like 60s, but anywhere in that 75, 80 range is excellent. That's really good insulin sensitivity, which I'll get into later on with other biomarkers, but that's a really good spot to be in. BUN was up a little bit. Creatinine was also 1.22. So these are all pretty normal ranges. Anybody with muscle mass or heavier body weight is going to see a greater elevation in creatinine and BUN. So this is where a cystatin C test would be much more accurate as far as assessing kidney health. The cystatin C test is pretty expensive though, so I'll probably get that done in the next one. And that's only something I check like once a year. But overall kidney health appears to be in pretty good shape. And then we've got electrolytes here. These are rarely, if ever, going to be out of the normal range. I almost never see anyone's electrolyte levels out of the normal range as far as sodium, potassium, chloride, calcium, carbon dioxide, that sort of thing. Now, there's a reoccurring trend with albumin being in, you know, where it should be, but so I'm sort of on the high side, and my globulin being low. So this A to G ratio is always high. This has always been the thing, and I don't know exactly what's going on there. There could be some autoimmune issues going on. I've even thought there could be mild lupus I have, because I often get red right around my nose. I get this butterfly effect where this all turns really red and gets flaky and dried off. And lupus would make sense as far as the low globulin. It also could be a protein deficiency. Maybe I'm not getting enough protein, but that's something that has been there for almost all my blood work, where the AG ratio is just off. Liver enzymes a little on the high side. This could be from the training. My training now, it's a lot more bodybuilding based. So I wonder if all of the high reps, I'll start out with the power lift with the main lifts, 4 days total. I'll cover this in a separate video with 1 squat day, 1 deadlift day, 2 bench. And then I do tons of high rep bodybuilding work, like 30, 40 rep sets. So I wonder if that is causing some of this, these higher elevated liver enzymes. Because I didn't take off from training going into this. I think if I were to take 3 to 5 days off, 3 to 5 days total from training and then get these checked, I think the ALT and AST would be in the 20s, like 20, 25, a much more normal range. So I'm not too worried about that, but obviously it's a little higher than I'd like. The urinalysis is interesting because, you know, we've got a lower pH, more acidic, and there's a lot of stuff on here that showed up. There's some white blood cells, some protein, some red blood cells, all of that in my urine. So as has been documented previously, I had hematuria for 2 years where I was peeing like blood, like straight up blood, red, nasty pee, off and on for 2 years. And they did a CT scan of the GI tract, and it was just 3 kidney stones. So there's obviously still some residual kidney stones going on. I rarely, if ever, pee blood anymore. It's not a thing. But there's still, obviously, we're seeing still some effects from the kidney stones with this protein in the urine, the white blood cells, red blood cells. I'm going to definitely attribute that to the kidney stones. But it was way worse at other times where I was really just peeing like tons of red blood, as you can see with the red blood cell count being even higher previously. But not ideal, not ideal. I'm working on it though. Let's get to the cholesterol, the lipids. Honestly, guys, cholesterol, traditional lipid panel is not that important. Apolipoprotein B is a much greater indicator of cardiovascular health, cardiovascular risk, your risk for atherosclerosis, heart attacks, all that. ApoB is way more important. So traditional LDL is just not going to provide an accurate prognosis of how at risk you are from a heart health standpoint. Now, it's interesting here. My LDL went from 134 to 107, and the major change has been a lot more cardio. I would say I do cardiovascular exercise 6 days a week on average, and I'm typically running about 30 miles a week right now. So dropped it tremendously. And I was always somewhat skeptical. I said that cardiovascular exercise would lower blood pressure, but wouldn't affect your lipids as far as LDL. It could drop triglycerides, but that's clearly not the case here, because this is the lowest my LDL has ever been without statin intervention or ezetimibe. So I'm not big on taking medications for this sort of thing. Like I said, LDL is just not a good proxy for heart health. But 107 still, it's interesting that it dropped it to such an extent, just doing cardio. HDL 55, that's lower than 67, but again, HDL is pointless when you don't look at particle size. So you really have to look at the HDL particle size more so than the HDL amount. HDL has no bearing on mortality, and it's just not that important. Triglycerides went up. That's an interesting factor. Not 100% sure why. 63 is a better spot for them, but 88 isn't something I'm going to panic about either. Triglycerides do play a role in insulin sensitivity. Now, let's get down to the good stuff. Yeah, you're going to see iron binding capacity still pretty freaking low, almost out of the normal range, almost low. Iron level 95, fairly low. Iron saturation, all of this is quite low. Iron saturation is in a better spot, but the overall iron binding capacity, which is the most important thing, how well your body can process the iron, is low. So, I don't know. I'm taking B complex. The supplements I've been on, by the way, B complex, vitamin K2, 100 micrograms a day, vitamin D3, 5,000 IUs a day, and Tongkat Ali, 500 milligrams a day, I believe was the dose. So I might supplement in with iron, we'll see. But you see the 500 test level, we've done it, guys. We have recovered. I'm still recovering, clearly, but 500 test level on an LCMS scale, which is much more accurate than the standard scale, is huge. Last testosterone level on the standard scale was like 360, and that was back in December. So 500.3, I always said I would be grateful and encouraged if I could ever get to 500 again without, drug-free. And here we are, we did it. Now, I'd love to see this go up to 556. Maybe it'll rebound even higher in the months to come, but 500 is a huge milestone. And I was doing 500 milligrams Tongkat Ali going into this, but even previously on Tongkat Ali, I got to like 4 or 3. So this is huge. Body's recovering. Now, one thing I speculate about is I did put a pretty good filter on my my tap water. I always have drink tap water. I just get a jug and then I fill it up with tap water all the time. And there's so many contaminants in tap water, so many chemicals and contaminants and all this. I wonder if they were suppressing my testosterone level. I buy this filter, Hydroviv. That's the one I used. I don't know if that's the best one, but it filters out most things. It's like $200. Installed it underneath my tap water, and it just filters the cold water that you drink. So I'm drinking filtered tap water for about 2 months now. And I'm also using non-fluoride toothpaste, and my testosterone goes up significantly. So you have to wonder if these chemicals suppress your hormone levels, because I think that's a huge role in why my testosterone went up, honestly. I think the having the filtered water and not having fluoride in my toothpaste and stuff like that, I think that made a difference here. Free test is still obviously quite low, which can be impacted by SHBG being higher. So what I might do is add in 10 milligrams of boron to see if I can boost that, because the free test is actually terrible. But overall, the body is definitely rebounding from what you can see here. So I think 10 milligrams of boron might be another supplement that is worthwhile. A1C 4.9, that's fantastic. Down from 5.1. So very insulin sensitive right now. A1C is a 3-month measure of your glucose, your average glucose levels. So I'm really in good shape with a 80 fasted glucose, 4.9 A1C. DHEA sulfate, 148, 146 on the last one. That's awful. That's literally almost low. As you see, 138 is the lower end of the normal reference range. So I might add in DHEA supplementation. DHEA is a hormone that plays a role in all sorts of things. And it's stupid. It's banned by WADA. And so if you compete USAPL or IPF, technically if you take DHEA, it's a banned substance, which is stupid. You can get the stuff off Amazon. It's just a hormone that helps play a role in all sorts of cellular functions. And I might add that in because mine is just awful. I want to see if I could get that up to like, 300 or so. At some point, I tried it once, and I metabolized like no DHEA, even from supplementation. It didn't even move the needle at all. So maybe it was the brand, I don't know. Cortisol 11.7, that's pretty normal. LH and FSH 5.1 and 6.7, which is actually lower than previously in December, but that's actually good. When they're very high like that, that can be a sign that there's, something off, to where they're trying to signal this crazy amount of production and nothing's coming through with the test levels. So if you have very high LH and FSH, but your test levels are low, that can often show that there's something off in the signaling. Your body, something off in the testosterone production process, sperm production process. So this is a much better spot to be in, kind of that middle range. Prolactin 8.5, right in the middle of the reference range. Good spot. PSA 0.3, it's always 0.3. That's something I don't really need to worry about at this age. IGF-1, not real high, 135. So my growth hormone output is not great. Could be better. But I've always been pretty low on that scale. Which, with a lower IGF-1 output, you have a lower risk of cancer. And some of these cancers get flared up from GH, growth hormone, greater production of it. But so longevity can actually be better with a lower IGF-1. But cellular repair might not be as good. Vitamin D, so this is interesting. When I had the 104 here that you see, I was taking 10,000 IUs a day of D3. And now I'm taking 5,000 IUs of D3. So I metabolize vitamin D like crazy, because just bumping and cutting the dose in half from 10,000 to 5,000, it still puts me at 90. So 5,000 IUs a day, and I'm at 90 on the vitamin D scale, which is insane. So maybe I need to take it to like 3,000, because you don't want it too high. You can have a greater kidney stone risk and that sort of thing. But obviously, vitamin D is a huge precursor to all hormones in the body. But the 104 was on 10,000, same brand. Lipoprotein little a, I've talked about this extensively in the past. This is a genetic issue, plain and simple. I have, it's genetic. Nothing can impact this, as far as cardio doesn't impact this, diet doesn't impact this. It's genetic, high risk, puts you at high risk for early onset heart attacks, for greater plaque formation. Now, the one caveat, if you're one of these 1 in 10 people with the sky high LP little a like I have, you can somewhat mitigate the damage by keeping inflammation low, by being super insulin sensitive and trying to keep your body out of an oxidized state. So when LDL, when ApoB, I should say, when ApoB gets oxidized, that's when you're at danger for these elevated LP little a levels. That's when you got to be careful. Or that's when the LP little a can really cause damage and root itself in the arteries and cause that plaque buildup, the calcium buildup. So I'm not going to be too worried about that. I still want to get a scan done. I want to get one of those clearly angiogram scans done of my heart, just to see if there is plaque formation in my arteries from anabolic steroids or from this LP little a being insanely high. But I feel like if I can keep inflammation low, which you see here, 0.2 C-Reactive Protein, that's an inflammation metric, and you want to keep that as low as possible. So my inflammation levels are as low as they possibly could be. And if I can keep that down, I think we can mitigate a lot of the damage that LP little a could cause, along with being super insulin sensitive and all that sort of thing. Estradiol, 20.8, highest it's ever been. So again, very good sign that my hormones are rebounding here. Very encouraging, along with the testosterone rise. And as estradiol actually rises, so will testosterone. So if estradiol keeps increasing, we should see testosterone continue to increase. GGT is a liver marker. That's good, nothing to worry about. Progesterone as low as it could possibly be. Insulin, this is an elite fasted insulin score of 2.4. So insulin, the lower it is, the more insulin sensitive you are. Your body's functioning much better. Insulin resistance is the root of metabolic disease, diabetes, that sort of thing. So you want this as low as possible. For someone with the genetics like I have, where diabetes is a huge risk, keeping this as low as possible is going to be the key. This is almost more important than the A1C and the glucose. So 2.4 is just insanely insulin sensitive, which is what we want. Ferritin ties into the RBC, red blood cells, hematocrit, hemoglobin. That's really low. This is where I talk about iron supplementation might actually help me. I'm taking B complex, which is also a precursor to red blood cells. But T3, normal range. SHBG, really not that high. 30, 29 here is not that high. but I would like to see if taking boron 10 milligrams a day brings this down to maybe 20 and increases the free test. Apolipoprotein B is a much greater, like I said, risk for heart disease. So having this at 86 is a pretty good spot. I still could try to get it a little lower, but I'm happy with this overall. That is a pretty good spot with non-medical